Thank you for joining us. The climate crisis is perhaps the great challenge of our times. Now, as we recover from the pandemic, we have an opportunity to build back better. Our university is committed to sustainability, supporting Canada's strengthened climate plan, and helping to foster a stronger economy that thrives in a low-carbon world. Ryerson proposed science and innovation building is an example of the infrastructure projects Canada needs to fight climate change. This building will prepare the next generation of scientists and life science professionals, and it will drive innovation and increase the resiliency of our infrastructure to a changing climate. We look forward to sharing our proposal in the federal government's National Infrastructure Assessment. Today, I am pleased to introduce Andy Fillmore, Member of Parliament for Halifax. He brings a strong track record of support for sustainable growth and the environment to his role as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. Before politics, Andy spent 20 years as an urban planner and community builder in the private, public, and academic sectors, including as Halifax's first ever manager of urban design. His first private member's motion to the House of Commons called for greenhouse gas analysis of government infrastructure. The motion passed with strong multi-party support. Mr. Fillmore has served in Parliament since 2015. He attended Acadia University and holds graduate degrees from Harvard University and Dalhousie University. It's my pleasure to introduce Andy Fillmore.
And what a kind introduction that was. And I just want to say it was so great to hear Jason's daughter just at the beginning of the video clip. You know, we do this work for future generations, don't we? And so, Jason, for your daughter, we do this work. So thank you for reminding us in that way. So my name is Andy Fillmore. I have the great privilege of being the Member of Parliament for Halifax, my hometown. And as you've heard, I've had a background in community building and city planning for a number of years, more than 20 years before becoming elected. And actually, to my great surprise, became the first city planner elected to Canada's Parliament, and so far the only one. So this is, I tell people that because it's a plea for help. Lawyers we got, community builders and planners, and some of the non-traditional professions we need. So would love to have some company in Parliament in Ottawa sometime. So the work that led me to become to seek a nomination and to seek election was rooted in cities and helping cities to become more sustainable, to become less resource intensive, to use less energy, to do more with less, really, to develop more densely into livable, walkable communities and stop the scourge of low density car-based dispersed development. The shorter word for that is sprawl, but sometimes we run into sensitivities using that word. And I was finding in my career that the federal government, successive federal governments, weren't giving attention to cities and communities the way that they did to achieve these goals of sustainability and reduced energy usage. So I wanted to make a difference, and by the great luck of the universe, I landed as an MP for Halifax in a government that is undertaking the largest investment in community infrastructure in the history of Canada. This is a generational reinvestment into communities so that they can be more sustainable and inclusive. And this is really kind of like on the scale of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal back in the 1930s depression in the United States. So we live in transformative times, and to be a planner and a community builder, whose purpose I feel is sustainability and reducing humans' footprint on the earth. I can't imagine a better time to have landed here. I don't really want to go on at length about me. I'd much rather speak with Bala about the issues that are on his mind and on your mind. So I think I'll leave it there, Bala, and I can't wait to have a discussion.
Thank you, Parliamentary Secretary Fillmore. Thank you for being here with us today. We thank the federal government for its continued support and investment at the Center for Urban Energy and the broader NSERC Energy Storage Technology Network. We really appreciate it. Now, let's dive into some questions. But before we get there, a word to our audience. Please post your questions using the Q&A tab on your right, and we'll get to them at the end of the session. All right, sir. The first question to you. We've heard this morning from our experts in the electric vehicle space. What's your vision on the electrification of vehicles in general, including buses?
Thanks for that. I mean, this is such a rich topic area. Transportation, as you will know, is the second largest source of GHG emissions in Canada. It actually accounts for a quarter of Canada's total emissions profile. And almost half of that quarter, so an eighth of Canada's emissions, come from cars and light trucks. Isn't that remarkable? So, I mean, the planner in me always wants to get people out of cars and to have them to be able to live in complete communities that don't have the decision to own a car thrust upon them, but rather can choose active transportation or walking or transit to get where they need to go, and then have a car if you need one. But you shouldn't be in a position where you have to, just so that you can get to your job or your school or your work. So let's focus then on the people that do need to have cars, and let's make them better. So certainly incentivizing the research and development of zero emission vehicles and incentivizing them through the rebate, the federal rebate, is a good starting point. At the Department of Infrastructure in the federal government, we're focused on the infrastructure needed to build these sustainable and vibrant communities that I'm talking about. So we've been, one example would be we're working on the purchase of 5,000 school and transit zero emission buses to disperse across Canada. And that's part of a larger $15 billion commitment to public transit that we announced recently. So I think, the electrification of transport is an easy win to reduce the pollution in Canada. And by the way, create jobs for Canadians by enhancing public transit systems and switching them to cleaner power. It's kind of you're kind of winning on all those points. I guess the message I want to leave is, let's work really hard to electrify Canada's rolling stock, especially transit, but vehicles where people need vehicles. But let's also remember that we need to build communities for people and not for cars. As the famous person once said, if you design cities for cars, you get cities full of cars. If you design cities for people, you get cities full of people. So let's remember that as well.
That's fantastic. I couldn't agree more. I do take transit every day, the GO train, and I travel about 40 kilometers one way. So I couldn't resonate more with your answers and your thoughts than anything else. So thank you for that. That's fantastic. Okay, I'll go on to the next one here. The audience would like to know how Canada should work on changes to transit to make it greener and accessible to more communities. And I would stress the accessible factor of it here.
Accessible. Okay, thank you for that. Accessibility in its broad definition, physical accessibility, but also through an equity lens, is very important to keep in mind as we go through this sort of reinvention of Canadian infrastructure. So the federal government is doing quite a bit in this space right now. You'll know that as part of the Investing in Canada infrastructure plan, the $180 billion generational plan that I mentioned, one of the four streams is about transit. It's about public transit. So there's a tremendous amount of capital available there. But more recently, it was in February, the Prime Minister announced another $15 billion over the next 8 years, starting this year, for public transit projects all across Canada. Now, this is going to include new permanent funding of $3 billion a year for public transit for communities across Canada, beginning in 2026 after the Investing in Canada program sunsets. So what I'm saying is we've got the existing Investing in Canada infrastructure transit money now, and when that program sunsets in 2026, we are committing to permanent public transit funding going beyond that. So what's that funding going to do? It's going to support the economic, the environmental, and the social outcomes in Canadian communities of all sizes by focusing on these smart investments. The permanent funding is going to allow communities to plan long-term and build the kind of sustainable transportation networks that they need to meet, importantly, our ambitious climate targets. And so transit, in the way that you use it, Bala, is one of the ways that every Canadian can participate in the Team Canada approach to meet the net zero 2050 climate targets. So we're going to get there by doing things like supporting new subway lines like those announced in Toronto, new light rail lines like the one announced in Hamilton. We might get an electric ferry in Halifax Harbor, or we're working hard to see if that can become a reality. If we may be ahead of the technology, but we're going to hope that the technology will meet the challenge. But as I also mentioned, we're going to work to electrify transit. And another example of this is a recent announcement of $568 million to purchase 60 zero-emission streetcars for the TTC, for the Hillcrest streetcar storage facility in Toronto. I want to make clear here, because you mentioned accessibility, that this is not just about large urban centers. There's also discrete funding available for rural transit. There's discrete money available for active transportation. There is money available for electrification of existing fleets, for retrofitting. So these are important things. We have to meet people where they are so that they can participate in the changes that we're trying to make. And if that means rural communities, of course, we're going to meet them there. And finally, I think, and importantly, the federal government's going to be investing in the expansion and enhancing of transportation networks in communities of all sizes. So, does the streetcar system connect to the bus system? Does the bus system connect to the active transportation network? These interconnections become extremely important and are what enable us to live effectively in these walkable, healthy communities that I'm trying to describe.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I really like the full solution model that you have, and also that you're thinking about both urban and rural communities together, which gives us a complete solution, which is really what we need. But somehow I feel these questions are easy for you because of the planner in you. So I thought we'll up the game a little bit and ask you some more difficult questions, if that's okay. So, all right. So the next one is about greenhouse gas emissions. So please share your thoughts on Canada's greenhouse gas reduction targets and how we might achieve them.
It was interesting to, I was elected for a second time in 2019. So it was my second campaign to go through. And that campaign was so different than the 2015 campaign. And I just want to take a moment on this, because our society is evolving. We demand more. We've become more sophisticated. Canadians are much more sophisticated in what they expect from government and from industry on this file. But in 2015, we were really hearing about the imperative to do better on emissions from environmentalists, people who were really sort of learned in the field, who had spent a long time occupying it. But by the time 2019 came along, I believe it was the Canadian youth that mobilized in a way that we hadn't seen before, the climate rallies, the climate marches, and taught their parents the importance of this. And the parents took on the mantle of their kids, the kids' cause. So when I was knocking on the tens of thousands of doors that I knocked on in 2019, it was a very different experience. Every door, somebody had something to say about climate change. So, and that was happening across the country. So just earlier this year, we announced ambitious new targets to reduce GHG. So we're going from 30%, the previous target, to reductions to 40 to 45% from 2005 levels by 2030. Substantial ramping up there. And of course, that is critical to the path we're on to get to our net zero by 2050 goal. And as we were talking about in the previous part of our discussion, these goals are going to impact the way that we live our lives and conduct business in Canada. As to how we might achieve them, our government has also announced through the recent federal and through our new strengthened climate plan that was released, I want to say in about October or so last year, a proposed new investment of nearly $18 billion toward green recovery. That's going to create amazing jobs, for one thing, to help to build a green economy, and help to give us the tools and infrastructure and technologies to help to protect us against and also to fight against climate change. To get all this done, we need really good partnerships with the private sector, with the academic sector, and as I said, Bala, earlier, we need Canadians. We need to be in partnership with Canadians, because everything that we do makes a difference in our homes and in our lives. It's funny to think back, 10, 15 years ago, we all thought our part for climate change was separating our trash from the recycling. It's so much more than that now. We all bear a much greater personal responsibility in the choices that we make, and the federal government is there to help create the conditions for success for Canadians who are going to participate in this transition.
That's awesome. And that's so enlightening, because if everyone believes in the same message of greenhouse gas reduction and zero carbon 2050, it's much easier to get there as a team as opposed to an individual. So thank you for that. Now, however, when we move as a team, there are some who have and some who don't. And how do we take everybody together is an important question. So the question is, please let us know your thoughts on green energy solutions for whole of Canada, especially those provinces that aren't bestowed with easy access to renewables and have relied on fossil fuels. So we would love to hear your thoughts on those.
Yes, it's important. We need to bring everybody along together, and we are, the government is particularly concerned with and seized with the prairie provinces, the oil-producing provinces, and how we can successfully transition workforces and economic means for families there to a low carbon economy. So this is indeed a strong, a great challenge. As well, we're seeing how different provinces are the speed at which they're transitioning to low carbon models. So we've got some that are really leading. New Brunswick, Northwest Territories, they're up to around 70% renewable. There are other provinces that are quite far behind, and although Nova Scotia is catching up quickly, we do have some ways to go right now. But we have plans in the works with the Atlantic Loop, and maybe we'll come to that in a moment, and some other projects to do with wind and solar that will help us. So the point of this is that every Canadian community has the capacity to access clean energy from a variety of energy sources. We're also trying our hand at tidal around here, which is proving to have some challenges. But for example, there's significant solar potential in British Columbia and Prince Edward Island, the Southern Northwest Territories, Nunavut. Renewable wind energy is available in every province and territory. The coastal regions have some of the best potential, and anybody who's stood on the Halifax waterfront can attest to that during a storm. As for hydropower, Quebec leads the way. They have really figured this out over a long period of time. But this potential exists in British Columbia, in Alberta, in the Yukon, Northwest Territories. Quebec has a lot to teach the other provinces on this. Where we're relying more heavily on fossil fuels, besides having the renewable opportunities, we can also get involved in, it's a jargon word, and you will know it, and your group may know it, but inter-T, right? The inter-T is this notion that electricity produced in one grid can be transferred or shared to another grid. What this means in normal language, I think, is NB Power and Nova Scotia Power can share a grid, and one can provide for the other in times of low production, and vice versa. So I get now to the Atlantic Loop. I guess we will talk about it now. This is an inter-T project that will have the power, literally the power, to bring renewable energy in from Quebec, from New Brunswick, from Newfoundland and Muskrat Falls. It's going to dramatically reduce the GHG footprint of the Atlantic region. And going back, I want to say one last thing, because you delightfully mentioned accessibility, and I try to look at all of my work through this accessible lens and this equity lens. There are remote, rural and northern and indigenous communities, so many of whom rely on diesel as their main power source. And when you visit these communities, it really is remarkable how present the generators are, and the need to feed them. It really becomes a part of the community that becomes, a preoccupation, you might say. So we're investing about $1/3 billion to ensure that communities like that, who currently rely on diesel, to be powered by clean and reliable energy by 2030. That's the goal. And the great example is Fort Chipewyan, which has an Indigenous-owned remote solar farm in Alberta that's going to be reducing emissions by nearly 2,000 tons per year when it's up and running. So there we have it. There's some good ideas for us, I think.
Thank you. That's very exciting, and I think bringing everybody together, and Canada is bestowed with so many natural resources that we can produce electricity and bring it to each other, different provinces, and also export through interconnections to other states in the U.S. So there is a huge opportunity in here, and that's fantastic. Now, let me move to something more personal to you. So could you please talk about any transformative greenhouse gas reduction projects that excite you?
Yeah, sure. Well, there are a few, and I'll give you some good examples. But when we were doing our technical test for this conversation last week to make sure that the connections were working well, we talked about green hydrogen, and I just want to maybe start with that one. The federal government has released a national hydrogen strategy, and the potential here to use electricity created through renewables to create what we're calling now green hydrogen is enormous. And on one hand, we're trying to figure out how to store energy that comes from renewables. Battery storage is getting better all the time. It's very expensive. How do you store solar? I mean, one of the ways is you can turn it into hydrogen through electrolysis, right? So this is really exciting. Now, in many municipalities, there is an existing domestic gas grid under the streets. In most cities, those are in iron pipes, and iron pipes are not suitable for hydrogen for reasons that are beyond the planner's knowledge. But I believe them when they tell me that. But there are some municipalities, including Halifax. We got into the natural gas game late in the last decade or so, and they're all plastic pipes, I guess PVC pipes, and this is compatible with hydrogen. And I'm told that we can actually inject up to 20% of the volume of the pipes can be hydrogen. So this is something that'll start to wean us off of natural gas. As we know, it has its own carbon footprint and other issues. So I wanted to put the plug in there for hydrogen because I think it is part of our pathway to a low carbon economy. But you asked about some specific projects that already exist, and there are a number of them. Under the Investing in Canada infrastructure plan that I mentioned, we're investing a little over $8 billion in such green infrastructure projects, and about $4 billion of that is going to mitigation projects that also reduce GHGs. So here are some of those projects. The North Coast Regional District, or Charge North project, is going to be installing around 55 level 2 electric vehicle chargers in about 25 local governments and First Nations communities in northern and central British Columbia. So that's going to be remarkable. There's the construction of a cellulosic biofuel plant in Varennes, just outside of Montreal, and that's going to convert sort of non-recyclable and non-compostable materials into renewable biofuels for vehicles. All that stuff that usually just goes into the landfill, we can now convert into biofuels with this technology. There is the Oasis 10 megawatt solar plant that is being developed by Cowessess First Nation and Elemental Energy, and that's going to provide renewable solar energy directly to the Sask Power grid, which will then help to power the Cowessess First Nation reserve in Saskatchewan. And then the last example I have is the construction of a new 138 kilovolt transmission line measuring 106 kilometers from Sherbrooke to Tignish in PEI, Prince Edward Island, here in the Atlantic provinces. And that's going to allow renewable energy to be transferred from one community to another within PEI. So there's also about $5 billion available for green infrastructure projects through the Canada Infrastructure Bank, the CIB, and that's to support projects like the Lulu Island Energy Company's District Energy Project that involves expanding the city of Richmond's current district energy system. So we really are trying to get our fingers into this and change the way that we power our lives. So every time we flip on a light switch or press that automatic door opener, which I tell my daughter not to do, there's a little puff of smoke coming out of a smokestack somewhere usually. But we need to turn our minds to making sure that we stop those, we get to renewables, and again, to bring it back to people, we all in our daily lives can be engaging in choices and actions that help us to reach our net zero goal.
That's fantastic, and it's good to know of so many projects and more projects to come, and all the that's available that are channeled towards green projects that are going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's fantastic. Now, of course, I'm from a university, and I got to plug in for the university.
Yeah.
So thank you for your previous answers, but you cannot skip this one. How does your government see the role of Canadian universities in solving greenhouse gas emission challenges?
The universities are the future, aren't they, Bala? It's where all the good stuff happens, and where all the people who make good stuff happen come from. So our low carbon future is inextricably twined with universities in Canada. A great local example is is Jeff Don, the battery scientist who runs the only Canadian Tesla battery lab here at Dalhousie University. He is doing remarkable work and inspiring the next generation of researchers to follow in his footsteps and do good things. And why would he do that? Well, climate change, as we know, is ultimately it's the challenge of our generation, the challenge of our times, and we all have to contribute in some way by mitigating climate change, reducing GHGs. So post-secondary institutions, as I've said, have a particularly unique opportunity to position themselves as leaders, not just through that research piece, which is enormous, but also by considering what's happening actually on the campuses. There's a tremendous amount of infrastructure, buildings, transportation infrastructure, energy consumption that universities account for in Canada. And by sort of getting a handle or assessing what a school's GHG footprint is, institutions can figure out the quantity of emissions, whether it's heating or transportation, and where those efficiencies and reductions can be found. How you can marry those opportunities to federal funding. We're working. Many of us are trying to work on a strategic post-secondary infrastructure fund that doesn't exist yet, but we hope one day it will, to help universities on this very question of retrofitting. You can also teach. You're offering academic courses and programs that address climate change and reduce emissions. And so one example that comes to mind would be Ryerson's Bachelor of Environmental and Urban Sustainability program. In that program, students will be able to use the knowledge that they've gained from their studies to then go work for organizations that are focused on reducing emissions and raising awareness, like environmental nonprofits or private engineering firms or the government. So you're creating the next generation of leaders. And by the way, I feel the same way about planning schools. I think planning schools are increasingly important because of that impact on community that I've already discussed. I would say that universities can also support student-led organizations, right? Empower students to make change while they're actually on campus. On campus gardens and farming, free stores like we have at St. Mary's University here in Halifax that allow for the exchange of food and clothing, goods like clothing and kitchenware, and help people get rides and that kind of thing. And then, of course, just to finish it back on that research piece, universities are present on all aspects of the innovation spectrum, from knowledge creation to research and development to partnering with industry, commercialization of clean technologies. The market for these new technologies is said to be, approaching 3 trillion in the next several years globally. And universities will be absolutely key as we capitalize on that opportunity, not only just to create jobs, but always job one, the prime directive, which is transitioning to net zero.
Thank you. That's fulsome and that's great. I think there is a tremendous potential for us to participate along with the government and the society to create new knowledge and potentially create jobs, technologies, and commercialize them here in Canada and worldwide. So thank you for that, and I really appreciate your thoughts on that. I have one last question in my set of questions before we go to the Q&A with the audience, and this is, what should I tell my students about energy and climate future? Should they be hopeful?
Should they be hopeful? Yes. This is such a good question. Yesterday, I participated virtually in a graduation ceremony for the School of Planning here at Dalhousie, and my message to them was that they're needed, that the planet needs them, that needs their energy, their drive, their ingenuity, because there is a serious threat here, right? So I guess I would say, yes, there's hope, but the hope lies in you, it lies in the students. There's good and bad news here, right? The bad news is that climate change is already having a significantly negative impact on our health, on the economy. It's on the planet itself. The increasing frequency and severity of storm events. The most recent science indicates that Canada is warming at about twice the global average, and even faster in the north. I don't want to keep on focusing on the economics of this, but you can't make change if you can't pay for the change. So it is important. The economic costs are going to be enormous if we fail to adapt. The health costs with extreme weather events are estimated to be approaching $2 billion a year. Furthermore, the cost of property damages from climate change have risen from $405 million a year between 1983 and 2008 to 1.8 billion a year, and these costs are expected to go to $43 billion a year by 2050. So in a lifetime, going from 400 million a year to 43 billion. What is that, Professor? 2 orders of magnitude. It's remarkable.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for checking my work. Health Canada has identified numerous climate-related health impacts, like increased respiratory and cardiovascular illnesses. Look, I don't want to dwell on all of it. The hopeful part is that we live in a country that is a world leader in the fight against climate change, and we're taking action to reduce the emissions and create innovation and create jobs. The government is providing support to a wide variety of programs that aim to reduce emissions. We've recently announced nearly a $3 billion program for home energy retrofits. We're doing the $5,000 ZEV grants, zero emission vehicle grants. We're doing a $1.5 billion program for green and inclusive community buildings through retrofits. We're investing almost $1 billion in smart renewable energy and grid modernization projects. I would say that the energy future in Canada looks very promising. more promising than it has in decades. So, you know, as you know, there's no greater joy than teaching and to being around the energy and curiosity of students. And it's our work to unleash that and to direct that in a way that students can feel that they have agency in where the world is going and what the solutions will be. So my message, so I'll come back to how I started, it's a message of hope. The hope lies in you. So keep on doing what you're doing and save the world, will you? We need it.
That's a fantastic message. And as I often heard from my supervisor for PhD, he said the solution lies within you. You have to go and find those solutions for you and for all of us. So thank you for that. And that's a fantastic answer. I really appreciate it. And I actually believe in it. Great. So now we are at 12:52 and your time is precious. So I'm going to turn over to the questions from audience when you have a moment to take a break. And then let me go off to the questions from audience and I'll go one after the other if that's all right. So the first question here is I'm trying to make heads or tails of Nova Scotia's Integrated Resource Plan, IRP. Will Nova Scotia have a net zero grid by 2050? Personally, I think the goal should be more like 2040. Over to you, sir.
Well, somebody's done some homework. I'm so glad. This is what we're talking about, right? Empowering people to take on the knowledge and eventually the decision making. So thank you to the questioner. I can't tell you the actual year. I've got a thick binder over on the other part of my office that if I spend a few minutes flipping to the right page, I can tell you the answer specifically. We are on a rapid journey to net zero. You may know that in Nova Scotia, we have sped up our getting off coal target. Coal has been a particularly difficult nut to crack in Nova Scotia. It's in the culture of part of Nova Scotia to be coal miners. There's a sense of pride there. There are large sunk infrastructure costs in the coal mining operation. And remember, we talked about how in the West we have to bring workers along and retrain and retool industry to get into a low carbon economy. We can't leave anybody behind. Well, the same is true. I'm thinking really of Cape Breton, that had been a major coal producer. So we have to do this in an equitable way. And I know we can never move quickly enough, but the challenge, the risk in moving too quickly is that we do leave people behind. And then that's where we get backlash, isn't it? That's where we get people, thwarting our efforts to make the change that we need to see. So I have great confidence in our current premier. He is the greenest of the folks in the leadership spectrum right now, and I think we're on a good track there. And if this questioner is from Nova Scotia, please feel free to reach out anytime, or not, or from anywhere. It doesn't matter.
Awesome. Thank you for that, and that's pretty insightful. Here's the next. How do we get to overcome longer term payback for deep retrofits that must include exiting building envelopes like window improvements in addition to equipment that meet 30% reductions? It's a specific question.
Yeah, that's good. I can see it here. Thank you, David, for that question. So I want to compare it to the LEED rating for buildings, leadership in energy and environmental design in buildings. So as you've heard, I've been in the development and planning business for a long time. And when LEED first started, it was hard to get people to take it up. It was really activist architects and activist clients that were first doing it. And the reason was that the technology was so early. It was very expensive. In many cases, it was unreliable. Factories hadn't been set up to build the kind of new materials and systems, all the way down to the building code enforcement officers at municipalities weren't trained in the building code wasn't up to date to manage them either. I remember, well, I was going to tell a story, but I won't go down that rabbit hole. Maybe it'll be in my memoirs. But what happened next is that everybody did catch up. The producers saw that was the future. They developed the smarter thermostats, the integrated building systems. The workforce got into training. The building code was updated, and now hardly anybody's building a building that's not LEED certifiable. So we're there. the next step is we have to do this with infrastructure. So I think we're on a good path. The payback periods of time are getting shorter and shorter all the time. And I think as the cost of climate change and the cost of carbon continues to rise, the upfront capital cost of these retrofits is going to make more and more sense over time.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I'll give you one more question because we are at 12:57. We need to wrap up. So in this question, it's about equal access, but it reads, different communities have different levels of access and demographics and beliefs. How will the plan accommodate collective and equal transition of all these different communities?
You know, when our government tabled a climate emergency motion in the waning days of the last parliament, so it would have been the spring of 2019 before the last election. As with all motions, there's a debate in the House of Commons, and I walked in to engage in the debate. One of the things I like to speak on most in the House. And as the opposition members sat down across the aisle, as you do, you sit down and you open your laptop to get to work, and there on the back of the laptop, an ocean of opposition members had put a sticker that says "I heart oil and gas" on the back. And I thought, oh, how can we be going into a debate about a climate emergency? And this is the sort of the starting point. But as I listened to the opposition members, they're representing the constituents, families in the oil patch, for whom the existential crisis isn't climate change and extreme weather. The existential crisis for them is being able to feed their family or pay their mortgage or put their kid in school. It's very personal. It becomes very personal very quickly, doesn't it? So the point of this story is that we really do need to make room in this conversation and in this transition for everybody, for every perspective, because as I said a moment ago, if we don't, the backlash is what will be our undoing. So we have to have a lot of patience and a lot of empathy, and we have to spend a lot of time listening to other perspectives, and a lot of time, I guess, educating, if you will, so that we can bring people along and make sure that they don't feel left out. So this is a question about allowing people to participate economically in the transition to low carbon, but it's also a conversation about allowing people to participate equitably in the transition, so that no equity-seeking group or other group gets left behind and has the perverse outcome of hardship as a result of a process we're all engaging to make things better. So this is something that we are embedding in just about every department's programs right now, this equity view. So I hope that people will see that more and more as time goes on. And if you don't see it, raise your hand and make sure people understand you're not seeing it, and we'll do our best to fix it.
Good. Thank you so much. It's 1 o'clock now. This concludes our virtual fireside chat. Thank you again, Parliamentary Secretary, for your insights today, and the audience for your questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. So I'll bring this session to an end. Our next session is at 1:30. We have a 30-minute break. The next session is about hydrogen. Thank you so much, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you later.